with a spirit of gratitude and a spirit of thankfulness on behalf of all of us. Because if it had not been for Dr. Cotton and Reverend Vivian, we would not have come so far. And they paid a supreme price in terms of sacrificing so much out of their lives just to get us to where we are today. And so I wanted to bring them here. And yes, Dorothy, we're going to have some workshop. You have to come back. We're going to bring you and we're going to take you back. We have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do. This is Northern California, and so often we get disconnected from our past. And there's a Ghanaian term, it's a mythical bird, Sankofa.
Yeah.
You know Sankofa, right? In order to move forward, you have to know your past, and you have to know where you came from. You have to learn from your past. And so we have to have more Sankofa experiences here in the Bay Area, because we are so far away from the South, and we are so far away from other kinds of movements that have taken place. And so you have really blessed us with your presence here this weekend. And I just want to thank you so much for that.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And welcome to the inaugural lectures of the Barbara Lee and Elihu Harris Lecture Series. Where do we go from here? And to our honored guests, welcome Dr. Dorothy Cotton and the Reverend Dr. C.T. Vivian. Thank you both for coming to Oakland to be with us this evening. Indeed, it is an honor as well as an opportunity to be in the presence of history makers and apply the lessons from the past to our current struggles of today. Thank you for your contributions to the American people and to the cause of justice. We are pleased and proud of Merritt College and the Martin Luther King Jr. Freedom Center for their excellent work in producing the Barbara Lee and Elihu Harris Lecture Series. And to each of you, we thank you for coming out tonight. We are honored by your presence. Today, the people of America face specific dangers. We also are presented with great opportunities for justice and a stronger democracy. We are hounded by the pain and fear of the Great Recession, which impacts our lives in so many ways. High unemployment, lowering purchasing power, high rate of foreclosures, and the closing of factories and businesses. And as you know, our schools are broken. Each day, more of us go without health care coverage. On the other hand, we also have great reasons for hope. People are aroused and ready to stand up against opulent wealth. We are openly opposing the immense gap between ultra wealth and the rest of us. We are beginning to stand up against violence and terror here in our own communities and in our foreign policy. More and more, we are aware of the significance of what time it is in the world and in America today. It is a time of action. It is my pleasure to introduce two dynamic young women leaders who represent Merritt College and the Freedom Center. Ms. Sinad Anderson, President of the Associated Student Body of Merritt College, and Ms. Stephanie Martinez, Youth Coordinator of the Martin Luther King Jr. Freedom Center. We will hear from each of them.
Good evening, everybody. On behalf of the Martin Luther King Jr. Freedom Center, I would like to thank everybody for coming out today, and I would like to thank Merritt College for giving us the opportunity to unite in this endeavor for these historic events that we know will change our hearts and minds and America.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening. On behalf of Merritt College, we would like to give thanks. We'd like to give thanks to all of the participants who are here today who are being agents of social change. This is a historic event, and we would like to extend our thanks to you. To Dr. Cotton and Dr. Vivian, we express our gratitude for your visit. To Dr. Taylor, thank you for being tonight's moderator. We thank President Adams of Merritt College for his vision and leadership. With a deep sense of awe, we express our gratitude to Mr. Elihu Harris and Congresswoman Lee and their support. Thank you.
Good night, Jen. Dr. King asks, where do we go from here? Chaos or community? We choose community. Therefore, we need community organizers, those who can, in Dr. King's words, arouse, educate, and organize tens of thousands for sustained, disciplined work. History is not just something of the past. History is also the present. We are making history. History is tomorrow. The question isn't whether or not it's history. The question is, in the struggle for justice, which side are you on? In the struggle for peace, which side are you on? And in the struggle for a stronger democracy, which side are you on? Thank you very much.
Aren't we proud of these young people? Let's give them another hand. We have reached the pinnacle of our program to hear from two dynamic history makers. It is my honor to introduce the Reverend Dr. C.T. Vivian. Reverend Dr. C.T. Vivian, a close friend of Dr. King and executive committee member of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, began his commitment to civil rights in Peoria, Illinois, and sit-in demonstrations, successfully integrating Barton's cafeteria in 1947. Later, he helped to organize the Nashville lunch counter sit-ins that initiated student involvement in the movement. He became a leader in the Congress of Racial Equality and wrote the first Freedom Riders bus into Jackson, Mississippi. Right there, that deserves a hand praise. Dr. Vivian worked with Dr. King beginning in 1961 and helped direct organizing in Birmingham, Selma, Chicago, and the March on Washington. Let's give him another warm welcome of applause and welcome the Reverend Dr. C.T. Vivian.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, I almost lived in California. I just couldn't be here and do all the work in the South and up and down my really home territory where the business was. So I had to leave California. I used to come continuously because California used to raise the money for SCLC. And as a result, I was here a lot, and it was just really what I liked. I know why you live in California. Is that every time I think of snow and think of my home state, I wondered why I didn't come to California early, you know. This place has been the kind of place that I've always thought of. I think of people who made the movement that are now living here. Martin's lawyer sitting here on the end, Martin's historian sitting here in the middle, the only man that could write an autobiography of somebody else. It just seemed like an impossible task. But if you had read as much material of Martin's as his, you could write one too. He knew Martin by word and by sentence and by structure. I think if you passed a note and said this was Martin wrote it, he would say, look at it and say, no, he didn't write that. He would know, even though you got the words from someone else. Anyway, let's get down to it. Is that very concerned because the woman that this series is named after was a woman that caught all of us when she was the only one that had the guts and the understanding and the depth, all right, to vote against war, all right? That's right. Only one, right? Is that I can't get that off my mind. You're talking about meeting people and how much you want to meet this person or that one. She was one of those very few that I really wanted to meet. She was beside Martin King and Mandela in my mind, all right, is because she was saying, this is what is possible. Well, you know, as much as we see and understand what condition we're in, nobody has been talking about the like condition that was the Great Depression. That we talk about this is a recession. Well, this is truly a depression. We're on the edge of the greatest depression since the 1930s. It will be well for us to review it and think in terms of it as we think in terms of what we face now and what we're going to do about it. And one of the things about seeing so many young people here was the fact that I lived through it all, and it was young people that made the difference. I want young people here to understand that it was also young people that made the difference in the civil rights movement. That there were moments that it had not been for youth, we don't know whether we would have made it or not. Now, we don't say that too often, but nevertheless, it's the truth. And I want you to know it, because if you don't know it, you won't play the role that's necessary for you to play right now. And that role is the role of action, but if you don't understand the past, you won't project the future. And that's what becomes most important. The Great Depression started the greatest change for the masses of people of any action in American history. Is that we saw that change come, and the Depression itself changed everybody here. It changed us from an agrarian world of seemingly security into the insecurity of an urban world. It changed us, and we saw the Great Depression come when people had a definite income to where they had no income. We saw a world that was not ready for what was coming, had not made any provisions for it. Is that if they think that Obama did something wrong by finding enough money in China to keep us going here, then they don't understand what it means to have the banks close overnight on you and your money's in and there is no way for you to get it out. Nor do they understand what it means if you are, like I was, going back to Missouri with my parents, and here my mother and she didn't see my mother really. She didn't talk much about it. But as my stepfather would go in and try to find some money, and he'd always come out without it. My mother would be leaning on the door, but facing away from the building. And when he would come out, they would talk softly to each other. Why talk softly? There was nobody there but me, and I didn't understand what they're talking about. I did not understand the depth of what was going on inside of them. Is that what had happened is that everything that they had earned since the Emancipation Proclamation was being destroyed by 1930. Is that everything that everybody in this country had was in the hands now of those that were richer. One county in Texas was sold in one day. A whole county. The wreckage of lives, the wreckage not only of wealth but of lives, is the thing that made the great difference. Every family was afflicted by it. Yet the still rich didn't want to admit that they were the ones that did it. Those that had the wealth did not want to admit that they owed anybody anything. They were the ones that still wanted to put Hoover in power in the most important election that was going to happen for many, many years to come. In fact, I think it is the most important election to happen until this election that we're facing right now. And for the same reason is that the condition has gone in a spiral. We have seen what was now is, all right? And the only difference is that there have been some changes for the good of those that had $250,000 or more. Their money would never, they would always get up to $250,000. Well, very few of us have $250,000 in the bank, and most of the people right now who have lost their houses lost the one time they had enough money to make a down payment, and probably will never happen again. We are called to do thinking like we have not done since then. In fact, when FDR tried to change it, the opposition party said, called him, because they were the rich, called him a traitor to his class. They did not want him to help poor people, average people like us, before they helped the rich people like them. And we see that as we see that we put the banks back in business. And then the banks back in business did not want to do anything for the people who reached in their pockets and got the taxes to make it possible. We are facing the same general conditions that we faced then. Is that when we begin to look at it, it becomes clear that FDR did keep us working, but that it was not the programs that got us out of the Depression. We had to wait till World War II to get out of the Depression. I was in the first grade when FDR took over, right? Of course, I didn't know anything. I even thought I did, but I didn't. But the point being is, by the time you live in an environment like that, it seeps into you. You begin to understand. You hear people saying things, talking about things, and you begin to understand that what the world is like. By 1942, the only thing that changed was the fact that we got into a war. That war took us out of the Depression, but it cost us 250,000 men at one point per week. Is that I remember teaching a class of junior high school kids and asked them, was the death of 250,000 people worth getting out of the Depression. Of course, I remember the teacher I was practicing under looking at me as if to say, why are you saying that? Is it because until you face that as a young person, you really haven't understood the meaning of war? You really haven't understood the meaning of money? You really haven't understood politics in American life. And yet, that's what you're called to do and called to act in today, is that until you begin to see the difference between what looks shiny and what looks good and what really is destructive to human life, you're really not ready for citizenship. And yet, and the struggle that we have gone through, the civil rights struggle that you were applauding, was just such a struggle. Is human worth, is human life worth more, or is it simply a throwaway in some exchange game for wealth? Is there another way that we do that? Is that even generals had to find out, as one general said, I found that I was a pimp for Wall Street. All right? It is very good to see right now that young people are beginning to understand in a way that we understood on another issue and beginning to deal with it. This right now is your issue. This is the beginning of your movement, right? Whether you will be with it or not makes the difference. We had a little movement down in South Carolina somewhere, and we thought, boy, this is going to be something. And some adults got hold of it, and pretty soon you didn't know that there had been any action at all. My concern for you is that don't let anyone sidetrack you. You are here to change America like we changed America. All right? All right? And the future of America depends upon this election. All right? The future of America depends upon this election. Think of it personally. Your future depends upon what happens in this election. Your future, my future, every human being in America and maybe in half the world's future depends upon whether we make the choice that was made in the 1930s over the same issues, right? Is that when we look at what depression does, it's very, very destructive. I was thinking in terms of my own life, is that because I was 6 years old, when we lost everything, the men couldn't take it. My grandfather, who had ended up with 2 farms, ended up with a house in town. If you were well off, you were a farmer, you had a house in town you could go for the winter, you know, that sort of thing. I see somebody shaking their head. And it was the way to go, but we lost it all overnight. He couldn't take it. He started drinking more than he knew better than he knew better, right? My grandmother divorced him. My father couldn't take it, and he walked away. And he couldn't take it. He couldn't take care of a family. And yet, he was a man. He was supposed to. He understood that. There was nothing pimpish about him, right? He wanted a real life, but he couldn't have it anymore, and not because of him, but because it was taken away by people that didn't care about people like him. And it wasn't even a matter of race, because they didn't care who they robbed, whether it was poor white or poor black. And we lived in a neighborhood where that all of us were together, black, white, but we couldn't do anything about the condition that was on us. We were being run over by something bigger than we could understand. For the first time the New York Public Library's division in economics was overrun with people. People were there night and day trying to find out what happened to them. They couldn't fight back because they didn't understand. Be ready to understand the world you live in now. Because if you don't understand it, it'll run over you. But if you do understand it, you can organize to control it. Yeah. When I say your future depends upon it, I mean all of your future. Let me give you what happened. Because you have to see is that when Roosevelt defeated Hoover, right, who was promising 2 chickens in every pot and 2 cars in every garage if you voted for him, and I think the normal stuff we were seeing grass growing in the tracks in Chicago. Nothing was moving, and yet he was making promises that were impossible to keep. Is that it will happen to you today. Now what we really have is something about a tea party, right? All right, who are making insane gestures and insane understandings of the condition in which we live. The only people that can do it is the people that will vote, will hear it, or the people that are voting against their own interest. All right? But when you look at our condition in Georgia, we had 300,000 black people who did not vote in the last election, ready to vote but didn't, and they had the first black president to vote for. 98% of those black who did vote voted for Obama. Yet we had 300,000 people rather backward, standing around, not being a part of a victory. So the state was taken over by somebody who opposed, by people who opposed Obama, where the masses of black people were voting, and yet we lost it in the state. We won it in the nation. But with 300,000 new votes, we could have taken the entire state. In fact, some of us now think that it's time for us to take a party. Not just a state, not just to win an election, but that it is our turn to move far beyond it if we're capable. It comes down to the vote, right? And the problem with the vote is that we haven't had enough people out to do that. I'm talking to young people here because it was young people in the last generation that made the difference. And it could be very well that you as young people in this generation make the difference. When we begin to see that none of us can really stay out of this fray, none of us can stay out of the political struggle of right now. It's going to decide peace. It is going to decide the other issues that we talk about. Is that if we lose this election, we will lose the other things that we're talking about. You marched in talking about peace. Will we have it? Martin King died telling us that there are 3 things we must do, but they're going to be decided more by this election than they're going to be decided by our organizing afterwards. Martin said that as he was leaving us, he said that we must end structural racism, right? Structural racism. We haven't touched it really, all right? But we must fight it, we must end it. He said that we must end poverty. and yet right now is heading us into poverty like we haven't had since the 1930s. He said we must end war. Yet we in the United States right now spend more money on armament than all the other armies in the world put together. This is what is robbing us. That's why Martin said that, and this is the genius of Martin. It's not a matter that we must end those, but that we must do them all at once. If you can't do them all at once, you can't win it. So that it's not a matter of it standing still to be picked off. It's a matter that we must organize so well that the money that would go to war comes back in to make certain that we end poverty. Poverty must be ended so that we can end racism. As long as we have one, we're going to have the other. This is the time for humanity to move like we've never moved before. We're on the edge of a new beginning. What Martin really did was to give us a new way to celebrate our own humanity. What he gave us was a method and a means, and he was in fact the man. For us, he became the symbol of what mankind should be and must be. My grandfather, my father, thought it was simply in making a job. They didn't know that they could make a new society out of which new jobs could come, right? Their sense of manhood was then. Our sense of manhood today, no matter what your age, right, must be that we create a society with a whole another understanding of what it means to be human in our own century. If we see it clearly, we begin to understand that if we lose this election, we cannot have our manhood. If we lose this election, we will also lose any sense of having an economic base for the rest of our existence, right? Is that when you lose when you lose the normal election, that's one thing. When you lose this election, you may not be able to make another move for 20, 30 years. That's your lifetime, huh? That's your lifetime. And it's all the life some of us have got left, right? Is that so that this is a deciding factor for all of us. How are we going to handle it? And when something is totally important, the thing that counts is not what we say. The thing that counts is what we do. It's in the action that we find out who we are. It's in the action we find out who we can be. It's in the action, and serendipity up out of the action comes the solution. It doesn't come in the talk, really. We must act. This is what Martin, he said that if we move violently, we would be destroyed violently. If we did not move, we would be destroyed morally and spiritually. Since we now know, since we have lived through, since we're a part of making and walking up to the doorway for a new sense of what it means to be human, it is not our time to think that somebody else should be in charge. It is our time to know that the poor, the oppressed, the left out, and most of us don't like to think that we're poor. Yeah, we're poor. We just got good suits on, right? All right. Is that oppressed when you can't have what you need for a decent life for you and your children, you are oppressed, all right? When we see life as it really is and the difference between having and not having, if together we can have it. I remember when labor was not united. And when labor was not united, a worker left home, was dark, came back, was dark, had to wake up his children to be able to speak to them, talk to them, but they had a movement. You know, it's interesting that the thing that's not taught in our schools are the most important things that happen in American history. Is the great movements are not taught. There's no course on people's movements. Why? Because those who write the textbooks don't want you to know how to create a people's movement, right? Is that it is interesting that the British ran over the world colonializing people, right? Until 3/4 of the world was under their control. And they talked about the sun never set on British soil. What they meant, the sun never set on British soldiers on other people's soil, right? Right? It said, and we understand how the world has been robbed, but that it did them no good because they're no longer an empire. They're a little island left out in the middle, in the edge of the ocean, and they haven't the power that they once had. Is that the new world is coming. It's up to us to make certain it really develops and is fulfilled. All right? When we look at who we are and what we can be and what the nation really needs, it doesn't need the old, it needs the new. All right? It doesn't need the old. The old is failed. The old is failed. It's just that simple. And when we see that this nation has problems with its economy, with as many economists as we have, right? But when we see that the hoarding up of the wealth has not helped the nation, and doesn't help those that have it very much, because you can only wear one suit at a time, right? Is that when we see the world in which we live, we are either going to be part of it, a real part of it, or it's going to fail anyway. It is up to us to make the decision. You see, and it's up to those who love to make it. That's the other thing. Well, I keep talking about Martin as though I was talking about his birthday. But you see, his birthday is every day in our life today. You can't talk about an important issue without talking about Martin. You can't talk about how to change this society without talking about Martin, right? You can't talk about loving people, really loving people. I'm not talking about nonsense. I mean taking care of their needs, all right? Until you, without talking about Martin King. This is why that there is a statue to Martin there, right? And when I looked at that statue the other day, I thought, he is the conscience of America. That these politicians needed him a long time ago, right? The conscience of America, right? Is that, thank you. You know, sometimes you're happy to see one of those messages come. Says 2 minutes, right? So let me do it in 2 minutes, okay? Is that, let me repeat something. You act today, or you'll be acted upon tomorrow. You take charge today, or you will be used tomorrow. Make up your mind. You work now for your children. And even though you're young, you work now for your children, or somebody else will work your children. Yeah. This is a moment to decide who we are. This is a moment to decide who we're going to be. This is a moment to declare that we are the new world, not the old, and that the old stuff don't count. And we refuse to be what we used to be, but will become what we know we can be.
We have been inspired. We're in the midst of history, and he gave us a challenge. It's not in the talk, it's in the action. Do you believe that? Let us continue. It is my honor to introduce Dr. Dorothy Cotton. Dr. Dorothy Cotton served with Dr. King as an executive staff member of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. She was the education director of SCLC for 12 years. Upon the assassination of Dr. King, Dr. Cotton assisted Coretta Scott King in the establishment of the King Center for Nonviolent Social Change. She was the director of student activities at Cornell University. Dr. Cotton has been involved in organizing the National Citizenship School. Her upcoming book focuses on lessons from the historic citizenship education program and her work with Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Let us welcome another history maker, Dr. Dorothy Cotton. Let us give her a warm welcome of applause.
But we had two dogs. He had a dog and we had a dog. And our dogs were always children, so we wrote for Tom. Dog, 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 my dog. I love your dog, and your dog. I love I'm talking about my dog. I love your dog.
Stop that. Please stop that. Stop that. Stop that. Please stop that song. I'll tell you when. I was going to take you to the White House with me when I got a job up there, but you missed your cue. I very much want to do that. I want to, I want to share with you how important it was to listen to lyrics like that in the songs, because it was a powerful tool. Let's see. Something I wanted to say first. CT, I was trying to decide where I disagreed with you, and I knew what I was feeling. He was just talking to young people, maybe, but I'm not ready to stop yet either, CT. Not only am I not ready to stop, I am more charged now than I was early on. Now, I don't mind working with all the young people. We did that. I was out there at Kelly Ingram Park with the dogs and the fire hoses, and the young people stopped by where James Bevel and I were in the basement of the church, explaining to them what was going on in their town. But I'm going to have to really meditate a little bit about even the fact, as much as I love Martin Luther King Jr., he didn't start the civil rights movement, folks. He didn't start. Now, that's not to put him down. No way, Jose. No way. But I want you to know he did not tell Rosa Parks not to move to the back of the bus. He didn't tell her that.
She decided it on her own, and she was not considered a young person. He didn't tell those 4 students who sat in at the lunch counters in Greensboro, North Carolina, to go sit at those lunch counters. They decided it on their own. Now, we had people coming together of all ages in a program that Brother C.T. here referred to. They came together in the citizenship education workshops. But I am about intergenerational work and learning how to do that. I don't want one segment of the population to think that they have to stop because they got arthritis, because I can top you. If you want to talk about arthritis, I'll take the prize. But I am more active. I am more active now than I was. And, well, I'm sorry I got so motivated that I was just squirming to say, I don't believe that. And yet, I want to tell you that Brother C.T. and I were walking together. St. Augustine, Florida was the only place we had night marches. And I don't think we had night marches anywhere else. I don't know, maybe a couple of hundred folk were marching behind C.T. and I were leading a march one night. And I was holding on to his hand. And we were marching to the old slave market there in St. Augustine. Did you know they used to auction off people? But we weren't considered people at one time in our history, but that's another point. But we were marching to that place where now old men sat around with their pipes and reminiscing about the old days. And you could hear all kind of violent language, and you could hear chains rattling, and a few rocks were thrown. And people ask me sometimes, were you all ever scared? And we used to say no, but I stopped telling that lie. I remember being scared that night. And as I squeezed Brother C.T.'s hand, I said, we were walking together. We were walking 2 abreast. I said, C.T., let's pray. Will you pray? He's a reverend, you see. He knows how to talk to the... C.T. stopped and faced that line of march and put his hand up and said, "Our Father God." And somebody from the slave market said, "Niggers ain't got no God." And the brick started. Somebody tried to trip me with some crutches, and but we kept going. We kept going. I understand the slave market is still there, but they have put some posters there. But I thank you for listening. And we'll have a little set too about this. That's what my grandmother used to call it. I'm not sure what that means, but if he will want to take me on about not agreeing with, but no, I say we got to learn all of us to do this together. You see, again, Rosa Parks was not a child or a young person. Mrs. Amelia Boynton, who was knocked down on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. John Lewis was not the only one on that bridge that got a concussion. And a whole lot of other people. If you've ever seen the video, you see folk falling to the ground. You don't know yet, but, unless you've read a lot. Reverend James Reeb, I have to ask the historians. Sometimes they can tell me what we did. Reverend James Reeb, white. I hate those words referring to people as black and white. I think it's so, and people of color, I refuse to say. Everybody got some color. Your shirt is white, but you're not. If I saw you looking like that walking towards me, I'd call the ambulance for you. Yeah, white. The thing is, we don't have language with which to refer to each other. And there's some other areas, in which we need new language. We just don't. It's not to criticize. We need some research scholars to come up with some language that is more sensible and that refers to people. I think it's very divisive to keep referring to people by, the way we divide ourselves. I like what someone said, described the planet as a place of, like a bouquet with many different flowers in that bouquet. Have you ever seen that kind of bouquet, a group of flowers? And that's how we ought to see the planet and not keep separating ourselves. And we all do that because we don't have the language. Well, anyway, I got introduced one time, not terribly long ago, And my cousin worked at one of those schools where the children are actually under lock and key. And they were like 11, 12, 13. And my cousin emphasized the fact that I'm her cousin and I'm their speaker, and it was a Martin Luther King holiday. And I went with Dr. King when he got the Nobel Peace Prize, which is true. And as I stood from my seat and walked up to the podium, I heard one little girl say, after hearing the introduction, she said, "And y'all still living?" And I used to laugh at that, and I can see the humor in it, but I also decided that could be a real heavy, serious question. What does it mean to really live? And, there's a story if I had time, because I don't want to get one of those notes. There's something about timing. Anyway, I want to share a little bit of the history. You've heard some of it, but I want you to know I'm talking intergenerationally that we're gonna, and even if we have to have some workshops so the older folks can shut up when they need to shut up and listen to the younger folk, and the younger folk need to shut up and listen to the older folk. We got to learn how, and we don't know how to listen. Yeah. We don't know how to listen to each other. I remember when I learned that I was not listening, when I discovered I was not really listening. I was just practicing what I was going to say after whoever was talking shut up. And that's not good for a movement. And I've got to talk about what a movement really is and the spirit with which we move forward. But I wrote a bunch of stuff here, and a little bit of it I pulled from the book I'm doing. I got weary of being introduced as, and now we present Dorothy Cotton, or whatever they call me, and who marched with Martin Luther King. And I can't wait to get to the podium to say, we didn't just march. We had a training program. And I refer to what was my main job, the citizenship education program. Because anybody can just jump up and march. But if we don't know some things, to which Brother C.T. Rita referred to some of it, but we have to march and organize from a certain spirit. Anybody can get out and yell and be angry, and what does that do? If you don't have a goal in mind, you're right, we quote Martin all the time, but he was a smart dude, he was. And I want to talk about leadership. It's interesting how he led. Sometimes we could sit in a staff meeting, an executive staff meeting, and all of us, the executive staff, could be arguing about we should go to this place and we should answer the invitation to go to Birmingham, or we should, lift up the right to vote. And we were all energetic, and he was sitting there just, occasionally he might bow his head, but just kind of cool. And I remember one time, we call Hosea Williams a general. Hosea would come in, and Hosea was arguing for all the budget, because he was in charge of the field staff, the people who spread out around all the southern and border states. And he got some guys who were, I don't know, somebody said, well, a bunch of winos, but Hosea made civil rights workers out of them. I'm serious about that, because they hadn't heard, so Hosea knew how to talk to them. You see, now we could send Brother Andrew Young, who is, the son of a dentist and, college, university trained. Hosea was too, but he didn't let college, the university, do some things that it does to some people. But, we forget. For example, you said, what was that song you quoted as you went to your seat? Which side are you on? See, not only would we say which side are you on, we'd break it. Which side are you on, boy? Which side are you on? Sing it. Which side are you on, boy? Which side are you on? Okay, we could go on with some verses, but that was one of the greatest tools we had to sing together. Not to have somebody perform for us, but sometimes after going to one of these highfalutin schools, we think we can't do that anymore. We can't sing and express like that anymore. And if you do, as you're organizing, it's going to be a terrible mistake. I better read a little bit of what I put on this paper here before I get a note. But I want to share. Did I finish what I was saying about the song thing? I want to share, let me share a little bit of history. I think I stopped before I got to the end of that point I was making. What was I talking about? But let me share a little bit of history. I thought history was the most boring thing I ever had to sit through in high school. Now, my history professor in high school was also the basketball coach. And he sat at his desk with his head down in a notebook, I'm sure just reading his notes from college. And it was just so boring. All we had to do was to just remember some dates that he gave us. So incredibly boring. But I have discovered that history is one of the most exciting things and subjects that one can be involved in. You know, if I had 100 more years on the earth, I would spend most of it reading now, I know, and studying the history, not just reading it. It is incredibly exciting. I did write that. I want to quote, what I just said. I have a paragraph here. I want to quote Dr. James Turner, history professor of Cornell University fame. He said, history is not just about a series of dates and facts, but more importantly, involves interpretation and analysis and a point of view. I want to say that again. History is not just about a series of dates and facts, but more importantly, it involves interpretation and analysis and a point of view. As you study history, hold that in your consciousness. Historical knowledge, Turner goes on, historical knowledge, historic understanding shapes public conscience and thus politics and policy. History shapes a lot of things. If you don't know where you've been, you won't know where you're going. A lot of people have said, and how they got there. Well, let's see. I was blessed to be deeply involved in a historical event that changed our country, and I want to share just a little bit of that experience. Yeah, Dr. King's book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community? And I find myself these days, we keep learning, and not just from him, from some other people as well, but he just stands out as just a real shining light. I know what I didn't finish telling you. When I was talking about Hosea Williams, and Hosea walked in late once, and Dr. King, and we were all just arguing about some point, and Dr. King hunched me. I was sitting right beside him. He said, watch this meeting turn into a fight now that Hosea's here. And it did. Because Hosea would come in, as I said, arguing for most of the budget. That's what I didn't finish. But I'm just talking about his leadership style. He could be laid back. He's listening and hearing every word and making up his mind. I'm going to fast forward to a time when he decided not to go north to raise money in, where were we? Birmingham, Alabama. And, should Dr. King go north and raise money? And Harry Belafonte and some other friends were ready to raise money up there, and we had the church was full of people ready to march, but he should not march, because if we go over to the church, all those folk are going to follow us out of the church, certainly follow him. And he didn't say much in that meeting, room 30 in the A.G. Gaston Motel. But at one point, listening to us argue for a while as to whether he should go raise money, Dr. King stood up and went into the bedroom of that suite. And when he came back out, he had on overalls. Now, he was not an overall wearing man. He was a suit and tie kind of guy. Right, Clarence? But he came out, but those were our marching clothes. He didn't have to say, I have decided I'm going over to the church and march with those people out of there, because I can't lead and tell people to be physically involved as well as, just going to church and praying about this movement. He decided he would, but he didn't have to say it, is my point. I'm talking about various leadership styles and knowing how to listen, because sometimes leading means you need to be quiet and you really need to listen. And when you do speak, what you want, and by your persona, you create an environment, a spirit that makes people want to follow you. You create a spirit. It's like I heard a, you can clap if you want to, go ahead. I heard a conductor say, when he's leading a great orchestra, he said, I can say, shake my hand and do this and point to the saxophones and point to all the various instruments. And he said, but it is better when his eyes just meets the eye of the players, the instrumentalists, and he can look in the face of the singer. Some of the greatest singers in the world, this conductor I was listening to, and he was creating a spirit just by the way he was connecting with the people that he was going to lead. Now, I could talk an hour about leadership, but we don't have time for that. We have to come back and do some workshops. But I do want to say it was okay. I'm going to try to go back. I'm just going to confess, I'm going to be jumping around a little bit here because I don't have but a few more minutes. But it would be good, and maybe I'll try to stick to it a little bit. It would be good to be clear about where there is. Where do we go from here? And then I find myself, that's what I started to say a little bit ago. Where do we go from here? Well, we have to decide what is our sense of what here is, what it's like. Where do we go from here? What is here? And what happened to bring us here to this place? Does that make sense? Where do we go from here? Because I want to know what you consider to be here. What is that to you? Now, we could give you, share a whole historical, perspective on how we got here. I mean, I can go back, you can't do this, and that's okay. I saw someone, a blonde, blue-eyed guy just wrote a book, and he's right on. The photograph in the book shows a dark-skinned man tied with his feet tied up behind him and his hands tied behind him. And I burst into tears sitting there in my kitchen watching it because the man could have been my father. Now, this happened to have been in South Africa, but that man, tall, skinny, brown-skinned guy, looked like he could have been my father. Now, you wouldn't cry when you saw it, but I would cry because I'm close enough to the historical moment out of which that kind of violence, could be wrought upon people. I'm close enough to it. I remember that I'm going to fast forward here. My dad was in the Navy in the Second World War, and we were 4 little girls. He's raised them by himself. My mother died when I was 3 years old. We were 1, 2, 3, and 4 years old when she died. And my dad had worked in a tobacco factory, but and at that time you were not volunteers, you were, what's the word? You were to go into the military. You were recruited, right, to go into the military. Well, my dad was recruited. I said to Dad after I was grown, I said, Daddy, why didn't you tell them you had 4 children and no wife? He said, I did tell them, but they put him in the Navy. I'm going to fast forward now. My dad came with 3 of his white buddies. This was at a time when black folk and white folk didn't hang together anywhere. And he said they went to a restaurant in Atlanta, and his 3 white Navy buddies, all 4 of them in uniform. My dad could not go in the restaurant with his white buddies. I'm talking about where what we have come from, y'all. So put it in that perspective. Dad, and I can cry sometimes when I think about my daddy dying before he knew that one of my best friends, Andrew Young, was mayor of the city now. Daddy, you don't have to say or feel like you can't go to Atlanta anymore. You can go. I can take you to the executive toilet. But he didn't go back. He wouldn't go back. But he died before I could take him back to Atlanta. I could tell you some more. My sister's father-in-law, I took them to a restaurant. They must have paid us that week at SCLC. We weren't in it for the money, like CD said. But yeah, and Mr. Buck, she called her father-in-law. But here we are in this restaurant where previously only white folk could go. And Mr. Buck was shaking the chair and he couldn't sit down. And I realized he was nervous because black folk had never been in the same restaurant that white folk went into. And I remember saying, Mr. Buck, you can sit here now. And that's painful for me. I'm talking about where to go from here. Here or there has a different meaning to me than it does for you because you didn't live through some moments like that. So you don't feel what I feel when I think about the fact that they let those 3 white sailors in, but they wouldn't let my dad in. So yeah, we've come a long way. One little, so Okay, where do we go from here? Now, when I think about here, I could focus on all the changes, many of the changes, and I'm very conscious of the changes. At Cornell University, where I worked for 10 years, and walking through the mall, and you see white kids and brown-skinned kids and holding hands walking through the mall. You never would have done that when I was in high school or college. And I just think about when we ask these questions, that's why it's not a simple question for me, where do we go from here? Because if you don't have a concept of what we have come from, it will have different meaning for you. It would be good, okay, I said to know what here is. One little anecdote. The Washington Post did a survey amongst college students, and the question was, what was Dr. King about? Why do we celebrate his life and work? Now, a majority of the students said, we celebrate Dr. King because he worked to abolish slavery. Now, and I'm talking about something, this was just about a year ago, but they didn't know the difference. They knew nothing about from whence we had come. They didn't know anything about it. And I don't know, maybe it was taught, some in your schools. I bet you they know something of the life and work, of Abraham Lincoln, and that's good. And, I started thinking, who are the role models? Who are your role models? And I made a list. I'm going to jump around here. I think I'm getting really close to the end here. I know that we had some role models. We had some role models that were just really so important to us. And I find myself thinking today, of role models. I'm looking for that sheet where I listed a whole bunch of folks. I can start with, I listed those roles. And the reason I want to talk about the role models is because I worry about who your role models are, the younger people I am talking to now. I said, if your role models, somebody who sits in the room and says, now men ought to wear the seat of their pants down to their knees. And those become your leaders and your role models. I'm sorry, but that's what I think. You don't have to agree with me, but that's what I feel. Somebody made that decision, and even showing half of your anatomy. And but the fact that somebody made that decision. I don't have anything against Lady Gaga. Well, maybe I do, but I want to know, who are your role models, and why are they your role models? If you're going to go forward and create a better world, you got to look at what do they bring. What do they bring? I know I'm getting, what do they give? What do they give you? What do they do? Is my time up?
Excuse us.
That's okay.
Most of us live here in earthquake country.
What's happening?
That was an earthquake. You all right? You want some water?
Are y'all all right? Yeah, give me, okay, I'm okay, 5 or 10 more minutes. I guess I could have. I could apologize, but I'm not quite sure. I know that what values, this is a point, I'll jump forward and make this. I'll go forward and ask what are the values being infused into your being? What are the values by which you are living and thinking? Things that you see that are not working right, do you just get angry about them and blame somebody else? Or do you decide somebody ought to do something? Did you ever think, well, I am somebody, you are somebody? And are you conscious of what we learned studying the great philosophy by which the Mahatma Gandhi did his work, and people quote him all over the world. And I'm talking about Satyagraha, truth force. He decided that he was going to speak truth to power and organize his people. And yes, you will hear us talking about organize, but I get worried if you think organizing is just getting together and just going out marching, that people didn't organize. Now, that's why we went back to Memphis the second week because we didn't do our homework the week before, and we had to go home and come back. And we were having a meeting in Dr. King's room. Actually, he sprawled out on the bed. He didn't plan to make that speech he made his last night on earth. And we had invited some of the guys who messed up the march the week before because we hadn't been over there to do any workshops on by what philosophy and spirit are we going to have these marches. We had to go back in order to do that. But while we were sitting, about 12 people sitting around the room, the phone rang. And when the phone rang, it was his good friend, our co-worker, Reverend Ralph Abernathy, saying, Martin, you got to come over here because the people at this church, the church is crowded, and they knew you had come back to town to lead a march with these garbage workers, and they came here to hear you because they love to hear you speak. And he really could say it. He was a poet, really. And so Martin gets off the bed and said, I'll be right over. He had not planned to make that last speech that he made, but he went over there to that church and made that great speech. I may not get there with you, but my people will get there. I've seen the promised land, and you can read the speech. And but that's what he did. I got 2 minutes, huh? Oh, dear, dear. Oh, shucks. Okay, one thing I really want to talk about, I hope you are paying attention to what's wrong, what's not working right in the society. And as you decide what's not working right, that you would decide that you can do something about what's not working right. And, I think that, you can work on it. If people are dying for lack of food and water, do we not know some ways to relate to different cultures in a way that opens a door through which could help? If you know the jails are being filled with dark-skinned men, young black guys and Hispanic guys, if the jails are being filled just with, can you not put some energy into looking at why is that so? Do you know that the prison industry is a major industry in this country? And do you know whatever you work on, that you go to work on it with a particular spirit? And I've got a long list of things, but you need to decide what do you see that's not working right? And what will you do? And how will you organize? Well, you're going to be having some workshops at this wonderful institute that's being formed here, and the Martin Luther King Freedom Center. And maybe I can come back and I'll have more time. but I want to say, I'll take one more minute. Okay. The lessons that we learned that we could make the road by walking it. We didn't have a blueprint all laid out telling us what to do. We learned that we had more power than we knew we had. The more we got involved, the more we acted, the more we came together, the stronger we felt. We realized a new definition of power. We learned that we could change things, no matter how deeply entrenched a pattern or structure. We could change things, and everything changes. You have to decide how you're going to help it change. We learned that whatever skills we lacked, we could learn those skills. You can learn whether it's running a meeting or whether it's studying nonviolence, and that's why we could follow Dr. King. Nonviolence was a theory that all of us could face. We learned that we have government by the people and for the people, but only if the people bring that alive and make it so. Otherwise, it's just some poetic, empty phrases. Well, I'm sorry that I took too long, ma'am, but I'm just so full of wanting to share. And I thank you for listening. I'm sorry.
I take too long because you got interrupted by an earthquake. You did not take too long.